Why did Onana fail from UCL hero to forgotten keeper? Manchester City face Inter on June 10, 2023, and Onana delivers 7 saves that keep the score at 1-0 despite City generating repeated shots from central lanes. His performance earns the highest goalkeeper rating in the Champions League that night, reinforcing the perception that he has turned himself into a UCL hero during Inter's run. Inter exit without the trophy, yet Onana leaves Istanbul as the one player whose value appears to exceed the team's final position. The irony is that such a peak often triggers unrealistic expectations for the following season. This night pushes him toward a move where the environment changes far faster than his adaptation curve. Manchester United pay a €51 million fee plus bonuses to reunite Erik ten Hag with Onana in July 2023, expecting him to operate as a full sweeper keeper in the Premier League. The club frames him as the distribution upgrade who can replicate Ederson's progressive passing numbers, which inflates expectations before he plays a competitive minute. Because fans compare his arrival to Manchester City's established template, the pressure ceiling reaches its maximum almost instantly. The contrast between projection and reality grows before the season even starts. United's tactical plan now hinges on a keeper who must rebuild possession structures while simultaneously replacing a decade-long presence in goal, creating a fragile foundation for his debut campaign. Meanwhile, the squad around him destabilizes because 5 defenders suffer injuries in the early months, forcing Ten Hag to rotate inexperienced partnerships in front of a new, high-risk goalkeeper. Onana must protect a back line that changes weekly, which disrupts communication patterns and increases the likelihood of positional errors during build-up. These structural gaps magnify every misplaced pass and every shot that leaks through traffic, accelerating criticism despite several metrics pointing to systemic issues rather than individual collapse. The perception of failure forms faster than any adjustment period allows. This volatile environment leads directly into the next phase, where early mistakes reshape his entire narrative. Onana's first warning sign emerges in the 1-1 draw with Lens, where he spills a long-range effort that typically falls inside a Premier League keeper's routine save profile. That moment becomes more damaging once he misjudges Leroy Sané's central strike during the 4-3 loss to Bayern, because it confirms a pattern rather than a one-off lapse. The issues escalate again in the 3-2 defeat to Galatasaray, as 2 separate mistakes directly shift the match's tempo and weaken United's positional structure. It feels as if every margin tilts against him during this stretch. By his 10th competitive appearance, his shot-stopping percentage sinks below 65%, placing him near the bottom tier of goalkeepers in Europe's top leagues and pulling the narrative sharply against him. Crowd sentiment turns quickly at Old Trafford in October 2023, and sections of the stadium begin to boo him after another uncertain performance, which amplifies the psychological pressure surrounding each touch. As a result, defenders hesitate to recycle the ball through him, creating longer clearances that erode United's build-up patterns and expose them to additional waves of pressure. This combination of technical errors and environmental stress accelerates the perception that he represents structural risk rather than an adapting signing. The scrutiny grows faster than his chance to correct anything. These developments naturally guide the discussion toward how his initial promise collapses so completely within a few months. By November, major outlets begin to push the flop label, and that framing shifts public expectations because every minor hesitation now feeds a larger collapse narrative. His confidence drops visibly as passing accuracy falls by roughly 10% compared to his Inter average, which disrupts United's attempts to initiate controlled build-up from the back. Coaches also note that he stays on his line more frequently than he did in Serie A, reducing his impact as an aggressive sweeper and inviting additional shots from tight angles. The contrast with his Champions League profile at Inter becomes difficult to ignore. With no clean sheets in his first 6 European matches for United, the data reinforces the idea that he has shifted from hero to liability in record time, creating a psychological loop that affects every performance. In turn, teammates adjust their habits because they sense the mounting stress, often choosing safer backward passes or rushed clearances that further fracture the team's structure. This erosion of trust magnifies the significance of routine moments, and small execution errors accumulate until the entire defensive unit appears disconnected. Consequently, Onana enters December under the weight of a narrative that portrays him as the symbol of United's instability rather than one symptom of a deeper tactical problem. The shift feels abrupt but statistically grounded. These developments pull the story toward the broader question of how his season deteriorates beyond the point of simple correction. Onana arrives with a profile built on aggressive sweeping, tight support angles, and rapid distribution. Yet United's system rarely recreates the conditions that allow those traits to flourish. Ten Hag asks him to initiate build-up from deep positions, but constant defensive injuries force the backline to play narrower and more conservatively, which removes the passing lanes he routinely exploited at Inter. Because the team cannot maintain synchronized spacing during possession, his usual advantage as a proactive distributor turns into a liability whenever opponents press in numbers. The same actions praised in Milan suddenly appear risky in Manchester. With expected goals against nearly doubling relative to his Inter season, the tactical mismatch becomes increasingly visible across every statistical model. In addition, the Premier League's pace compresses his decision window, especially when United lose control in midfield and leave him exposed to fast, direct attacks. These sequences punish any hesitation, and his attempts to adapt by staying deeper only widen the gap between his natural style and the demands of the system. Consequently, the identity he built in the Champions League, defined by front-foot positioning and confident risk management, erodes as he adjusts to survive rather than assert dominance. It is the rare case where adaptation reduces the very qualities that justified the transfer fee. This stylistic fracture leads naturally into the broader discussion of how misalignment, more than talent, accelerated his decline. Cameroon's AFCON 2023 campaign adds another layer of instability because Onana arrives late to the tournament and misses a group stage match, which immediately triggers national criticism. The coaching staff respond by dropping him from the starting 11, a decision that carries symbolic weight since he previously retired from international duty after the 2022 World Cup dispute. As reporters highlight the timing of his travel and his inconsistent availability, the country begins to question his commitment to the national team, amplifying pressure at a moment when he already struggles at club level. The scrutiny follows him across continents with no pause in intensity. With media storms growing on both sides, his confidence absorbs yet another hit, tightening a spiral that continues once he returns to Manchester. In turn, the fallout from AFCON complicates his attempt to reset mentally, because each appearance becomes framed through the lens of divided priorities rather than technical evaluation. This narrative damages his margin for patience inside United's dressing room, as any error now appears tied to larger disciplinary or motivational concerns. Consequently, the debate around his form shifts from mechanics to mentality, making recovery far more difficult than a simple adjustment in training routines. The external noise starts to shape the footballing conversation more than the numbers themselves. These pressures carry the story toward the final question of how a Champions League hero becomes sidelined by narratives he can no longer control. By early spring, reports link United with new goalkeeper targets such as Diogo Costa and Georgi Mamardashvili, and those rumors signal that the club no longer view Onana as untouchable. As speculation intensifies, fan groups begin calling for a permanent drop to the bench, arguing that his error profile and declining save percentage justify an aggressive reset. United respond by rotating their backup in domestic cup matches, a subtle shift that hints at internal evaluation rather than simple squad management. Even minor decisions feel magnified when a player's form becomes a weekly headline. Contract questions soon emerge around performance clauses and long-term fit, pushing the idea that his future has turned unstable far sooner than expected. In parallel, the strategic conversation inside the club shifts toward whether a possession-first goalkeeper remains compatible with a squad that cannot sustain controlled build-up under pressure. This debate places Onana in a precarious position because his strengths depend on structures United failed to provide consistently throughout the season. As a result, every rumor about replacements gains traction, and the perception that he stands one mistake away from losing his starting role becomes a dominant theme in public discourse. The tension between potential and practicality grows sharper with each match day. These converging pressures now lead into the broader conclusion of how a Champions League hero ends up fighting for relevance within a single turbulent year. Onana moves to Trabzonspor on a season-long deal, and that shift reframes his career because he no longer competes under the intense Premier League spotlight that accelerated his decline. The loan signals that United no longer guarantee him a pathway back into the starting role, turning this period in Turkey into an audition rather than a reset. His challenge now centers on proving that the goalkeeper who posted an 81% Champions League save rate still exists, even if he must rebuild that reputation far from Europe's biggest stages. The change in environment offers relief but also removes excuses. with next season defining whether he reclaims relevance or settles into a quieter tier of the football pyramid. The line between reinvention and disappearance becomes unusually thin, preparing the ground for the final verdict on his legacy.